Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Jessie Ziebart. I am the Cultural Programs Manager at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art. We are here tonight for the Untold Stories event, which will feature a conversation with Sara Bukair and Izaya Brown. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that Sara and Izaya and I are coming from the indigenous ancestral land of the Suquamish and Coast Salish people tonight, living in harmony with the lands and waterways along Washington's central Salish seas. As they have for thousands of years, the Coast Salish are committed to honoring and protecting the waters of their ancestors for future generations, as promised by the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. Untold Stories is a dynamic series of free online lectures, panels, and conversation, which inspire, empower, and educate through the art of storytelling. For information on upcoming Untold Stories events and BIMA programs, please visit biartmuseum.org. And I would like to also remind everyone that we will be doing a Q&A at the end. And this goes without saying, but please be respectful and compassionate when you're submitting your comments and your questions this evening. And tonight we will hear from two Bainbridge Island High School students with very different stories. Sara and Izaya, thank you both for sharing with us this evening. It has been a joy meeting you both, and I can't wait to hear your stories. First, I would like to introduce Sara, who is a senior at Bainbridge High School and a Multicultural Advisory Council representative who is passionate about equity and social justice. Sara is originally Yemeni Ethiopian and has spent much of her life living in the UAE. She has most recently worked on voter registration and racial equity projects to help increase student civic engagement. And Izaya Brown is a student at Bainbridge High School. He is active in civic engagement with leaders of Living Life Leadership and has lived on Bainbridge Island for 5 years. So without further ado, Sara, I'm going to hand this over to you, and welcome, and thank you so much for joining us, everyone.
Okay, hopefully you guys can all see my screen. My name is Sara Bukair and I am a Bainbridge High School senior. And today I just want to tell you about my story with equity work as well as why I have always been interested in it. So I want to talk a bit about my background first, which is going to be very important in understanding the rest of this talk. So I put some definitions on the board for those who need it, but I'm a second generation American. My parents immigrated to the US in the 70s. Both my parents were born in Ethiopia and are Yemeni Ethiopian mixed. And although that may seem odd, this is a somewhat common combination because after Yemen became very politically unstable, a lot of people fled to neighboring countries, and Ethiopia was one of those main East African countries that took in people. So my parents were raised in Ethiopia as Yemeni Ethiopian mixed people. They immigrated to the US, and then they had me in the United Arab Emirates, which is where I was born and raised and lived as an expat for 15 years before coming back to Bainbridge Island. So it is kind of twisted, but it is important to understanding the rest of this. And I also linked an article on the definition of race in case any of you guys would be interested. It's just a very interesting word that has changed really the way it's been used over time. So I recommend reading up on that if you'd be interested. Before I start, I want to reference this quote from inaugural poet Amanda Gorman. She said that before she goes on stage, she has this mantra that she reads to herself, and it goes, "I am the daughter of Black writers. We are descended from freedom fighters who broke their chains and changed the world. They call me." And the reason that I bring up this quote is because when I was putting together this presentation for the first time, I really had to ask myself why and when I became interested in equity issues. And it was a really hard answer for me to try and come up with. And the truth is, it's really because of who I am, where I come from, my identity, my ancestors, and ultimately the life experience that has lent itself to. And it's just the way I was raised, the things that I saw as I was growing up, and ultimately the people who raised me. So before I completely talk just about myself, I want to talk about my parents. This is my dad. He was the first in our family to immigrate to the US. And the first place he came to in the US was St. Louis, Missouri. And he really noticed the racial tensions that were, there at the time. And he wasn't, originally sure if he was going to stay in the US, but it wasn't until he came to Washington where he felt like things were a bit better. And my dad is really the person who has entertained every political policy equity discussion that I've ever wanted to have. So he definitely is someone who has pushed me to manifest my passion into something substantial. Next up is my mom. My mom was the first woman in her family to go to college. She is one sister with 5 brothers, and that runs in the family. I'm the only girl in my family. I have 3 brothers. But she went to University of Knoxville, Tennessee to study journalism. And after that, she moved to the Gulf region in the Middle East, and she became a journalist there. And she got to meet many social justice figures, including Nelson Mandela, which I included a picture of her there. And so she definitely, I get my strong moral compass from my mom, or so I'd like to think. And so I want to talk about myself now and my first social justice experience, or at least, you might be able to call it that, which really happened seconds after I was born. And the reason is because my parents had a dilemma when I was born with deciding what they were going to name me. And the reason being, I was born in the United Arab Emirates, but we were living there as expats. We were there with US citizenship. So my parents always knew that I was going to come back to the US and that they were going to come back to the US. And at the time, I was born in 2002, which was 1 year after the 9/11 attacks. And being Arab and being American was almost a contradictory thing. And my parents were concerned with giving me an Arab sounding name because they didn't want me to have a hard life in the US. And they thought about it, but there's also an entire branch of my family that only speak Arabic and another branch that only speak English. So that's how my parents decided to name me Sarah in English, or in Arabic, Sara. And growing up, I've been called these 2 names, and it is a cause for confusion sometimes, but I'm always willing to explain. And it just shows that from a young age, I was always very aware of how I present myself in the world, because I have to be. And I even remember, growing up in the UAE, I was always, an American citizen. But whenever we'd come to the US on holidays, I'd sometimes see my mom restyling her hijab to look like a baseball cap, or to look like something that was more familiar with Western culture, just because of the way that she could have been perceived. So that was, automatically growing up, social justice is almost, intrinsically linked to my identity. So I was living in Abu Dhabi, which is a city in the UAE. It's only like 45 minutes away from Dubai, which is better known. And for most of my life, I was attending a British international school. For 1 year, I attended the American Community School. That was the year before I came to Bainbridge. But for most of my life, I was attending a British international school in the UAE. So all my teachers were British. Most of my peers, had some connection to the UK. And I was really the only person with an American passport. And I was, kind of known as that American girl, which is funny because when I came here, I was kind of seen as someone who came from a foreign background. But in the British school, I was that American girl. And the first time that I really found myself becoming interested in the civic process was in the 2016 election. And the reason for that is when the 2016 election was happening, I was, again, in the British school, and so many people would come up to me and, ask me what's up with this electoral college business. And, I wanted to give them factual answers. So I took it upon myself to do the research and come back, with a good explanation. And it really, those couple of questions really expanded in like the 5 months leading up to the 2016 election, because suddenly teachers were asking me, people were asking me to explain it in class. I was comparing the US Senate to the British House of Commons, and it felt very empowering to teach myself about the civic process or democratic process. Even though it doesn't always work, it still felt very empowering to teach myself about it. And I became so involved in, being a reporter to my school. I was basically the Jake Tapper of my British school. That I was invited to a CNN watch party, a regional CNN watch party in the UAE, to actually go and watch the election live with real correspondents. And so I remember on election morning, because of the time difference, it was a morning affair. My mom picked me up from school, and I skipped class to go to the CNN watch party, and I tried to eavesdrop on like some political analysts just so I could, go back to my school and report it to the masses. But I sat there and I watched the entire election play out. And even though, it was a rocky election, it still felt, again, very empowering to understand how the election process worked. And that was the first time that I really found myself becoming interested in civic affairs. Fast forward to the 2020 election. This time I was in Bainbridge. I moved to Bainbridge in 2017, straight from the UAE. But in the 2020 election, I was obviously very excited to be voting, or so I thought, but it turned out that I was about 10 days too young. And through the Running Start program at Bainbridge High School, I decided to start taking community college classes at Seattle Central College, which is in Capitol Hill. So I was a daily commuter. I took the 705 ferry. If you know, you know, it's a very busy ferry. And while I was there, I was talking to a bunch of college students who told me that they would not be voting in the 2020 election. And I understand that the process is incredibly infuriating sometimes, but it really struck me that people weren't going to be voting, especially young people, considering that they make the youngest and increasingly most diverse group of voters in the US. So it really struck me, and it really bothered me that I was talking to so many people who weren't going to vote, and especially since I couldn't vote. So I decided to launch basically a 4-month campaign to try and get community college students and other college students in the area to vote. And so it started off with me just, running a table and literally just stopping people, asking if they've updated their voter registration. And it ended up with me, hosting more events. And eventually I talked to Izzy, who is on the top left of the screen right now. She is from Seattle University. And we decided to host an event, basically a candidates forum, where we'd invite running mates who were on the Washington ticket, and ask them questions that were created by students. So on the screen, I think this was the lieutenant governor race. So both of these people were running for lieutenant governor. Denny Heck on the bottom right won, although Marco Elias on the bottom left is a current senator. And we were asking them questions about student loan debt. We were asking them questions about climate change. And we got a lot of these students who weren't initially interested to show up and listen and actually ask their questions, which were very legitimate and not really answered a lot, on the news. So we did this event, and we got a really good response from it, which was nice to see. This is also at the same event. I was holding a Time's Up card. I was a bit nervous that they weren't going to listen to the cue to stop talking. We wanted to give running mates equal time, but they did listen. at least better than the first presidential debate, which this was like a week after that. And besides doing events like that, I also focused on voter registration from an equity lens. This was another panel that, again, I was very lucky to participate in. This was about the Black female vote. And all of these women were very inspiring, and it was previewing a documentary about the Black suffrage movement and how that affects Black women and how that affects them today. And it was just very interesting to see. I had to do a lot of research for it, but again, looking through it through an equity lens and trying to, help other people learn about it. And this was on actual election day. This was me and a group of people that I kind of sprung together from the college to stand outside the ballot box on election day. And Capitol Hill is a very politically active place. Even when the whole Chaz thing was happening, it wasn't too far from here. So it was a very interesting place to be in. And we put up a tent. It was raining outside. We got a printer and we communicated with King County elections, and we actually had a place where people could print ballots if they had lost them, so there weren't any excuses. And we took students in the neighborhood, helped them print ballots, helped them post ballots, give them stickers afterwards. We had a Lady Liberty who was cheering them on as well. So this was kind of the last push of everything that we were working on. And of course, there were a lot of tough times, but one of the most rewarding moments was when, of course, after this election, there was a all-time high US voter turnout. And, as someone who couldn't vote, but was very eager to vote, someone who wanted to get others involved in the political process, seeing this just felt very gratifying afterwards. And obviously it wasn't just because of me and my friends who, got around 200 people to vote, but it was because thousands of people all over the country were doing the exact same thing. And that feeling of being a part of something bigger, it just felt very gratifying. So other than the whole voters movement that I worked on and voter registration, before that, I was really focused on racial equity, and I was trying to host talks with students. And the truth is, when I first came to Bainbridge, a lot of other students weren't interested in talking about equity work, and I really was. And that, to a certain extent, felt very isolating. But with everything that happened in the last year, students were really interested in learning more. I think students were shocked, and I really wanted to take advantage of that and ride that wave. And so this is the George Floyd tribute. Me and about 5 other students helped organize it in about less than 4 days. And I was hoping to tell you more about that story. Okay, well, I'll just tell you about it. So I had gone to one of the Seattle protests in the thick of when, BLM was happening. And I was there in the early hours of the day, but I could sense that there was a lot of hostility and that things might have turned south, so I left. And honestly, there were a lot of moments where, just watching everything that was happening on the news, I felt very defeated personally. And I had been approached from a BHS student who said that they wanted to do something on Bainbridge. And we had to be very careful with how we put together this event because we didn't want to attract any negative energy. And in fact, we did for this event get rumors that the Proud Boys would be coming, which was, obviously very shocking. But so we called it a tribute to, detract from what the media was, calling protests. And we put it together in 4 days. It was just students. There were no adults involved. And I remember that I went to the Bainbridge Island Police Department and I knocked on their door and I asked if I could speak to someone. And I basically told them that we were doing this and that we didn't want them to feel like, this was a violent threat, but we wanted them to listen. And we really tried to focus on amplifying youth Black voices, which we did. We had a mic set up, and even the day before, we didn't have a mic. It was gonna rain. It really felt like the whole event was falling apart, and we were only students. But I called every business on Bainbridge asking if they had a mic or a speaker that we could use. And eventually I called the barn, and they said that they didn't. But the lady on the phone said that she was a musician and that she could drop off her stuff in and see if it worked, and it did. And we had Spencer Bispham build a stage, and really, in just a couple of days, I really watched the community come together to make it work, and it did work. And I do feel, again, I have been focusing on the positives, but I do feel like Bainbridge has changed since I first came here in 2017. When I came here, like I said, a lot of people were not interested in equity work, and it was isolating. And even when I joined the high school, I had a lot of people tell me that my English was amazing for a foreigner. And I'll be the first to admit it was flattering for like the first 5 months. But I think that people were apprehensive to talk about conflict. And I think that that mindset is the biggest thing that has changed. People would either try to assume who I am, or they would just, not, turn a blind eye to it as if it were something that were bad. And I think that this mindset with diversity is, toxic, because diversity isn't about making us all the same, but it's about celebrating the differences that we do have. So that mindset really changed. And I included this quote again from Amanda Gorman. This is the second quote, but she really has been living in my mind for the past like 5 days. The quote is, "We've learned that quiet isn't always peace, and the norms of notions of what just is not always just is." And it's very true, especially about the quiet not always meaning peace. And if that is a hard pill to swallow, which I understand it can be, just try to think about it from my perspective. If, let's say, 90% of Americans are good people, but 10% are spewing a racist, anti-Muslim ideology, and they're the only ones being vocal, then for me, that makes 100% of what I can hear. And so this idea that quiet is being neutral is often not true. Some of the time, quiet just means being complacent. And I feel like people have realized that this past year. And I feel like people are more willing to listen and understand and actually discuss issues rather than shying away from them. And these two issues were again from the George Floyd tribute that we hosted on Bainbridge. And so before I leave, I just want to mention and finish up with my future with equity work and what I think you guys can do too. First point is amplify unseen voices and reflect on them yourselves. I can honestly say that it is not easy to speak up about your experiences. So if someone is ever willing to do that, just be willing to listen. And honestly, when I first came to Bainbridge, I did not feel, and this isn't just a Bainbridge thing, this was more of a me moving thing. I didn't feel like there was a space for me to talk about, these issues, or talk about myself, or maybe even correct people. It just didn't feel like there was space for that, and that people thought that was being political or stirring up trouble, when in reality it's just being who I am. So I definitely say amplify unseen voices and listen to them. The next thing is to continuously learn. And this is really important, and everyone deals with things differently, but especially for me, this really helped me get through the past year. Be sincere in what you are trying to learn. And initially I wrote help educate others, but I didn't like the way that sounds because it's really not about being educated or being uneducated. It's about being open to continuously learning. And especially with social justice, there are so many issues, and you cannot be expected to know the answer to every single one, but you absolutely can be expected to be willing to learn. And I know that social justice and equity issues have always been a part of my life. I know that they will likely always be a part of my life, but I also know that I will continue to learn as I go out through life. And for me, grassroots organizing and meeting with people didn't always feel like enough. I felt like I needed to understand why there was inequity at a fundamental level. So for me, that meant studying hard in school and doing that kind of thing. And hopefully next year I will continue to study, public economics with an equity view. Um, so it really is a lifelong thing, and you just have to be willing to learn for a long time. And the last point is remain hopeful. And this can be extremely hard. And honestly, my time at Bainbridge was probably character defining. And it was really a test. And in fact, it wasn't even a test for me, it was a test for the whole of America, including Bainbridge. And I think that it's hard to be hopeful, but you just have to be. And when I say hopeful, I don't mean, be blindly positive, be blindly optimistic, or, ignore bad things that happen. I mean, look at the bad things that happen, be critical of the bad things that happen, but ultimately question how they can become better. Because that is the end goal of social justice. And if we can't ask ourselves those questions, we'll never be heading in the right direction. Um, so yes, that is everything that I have for you guys. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening to me speak. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was fantastic. I so appreciate the time and thought and intention behind everything you put together. We're going to save the question and answer until the very end, until after Izaya presents as well. So as you're listening, please start formulating your questions. There's a little Q&A bubble at the bottom toolbar of your Zoom screen. So feel free to click on that if you're attending this and want to ask a question. You can put that there and we'll get to those at the very end. But bravo, Sarah. So appreciate getting to hear your story. And I can't wait to work with you more. I have, plans. I have plans for you at BIMA. So thanks so much. Next up, we have Izaya Brown, who's going to go ahead and present for us. Izaya, I'm
getting ready to share my screen right now.
Perfect. I'll just go ahead and hand it off. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming to listen to us speak. I really appreciate the words that Sarah had for us, the wisdom. But my story is starkly different. It's very, very different. Let's see. So this is where I have my character defining moments. This is Thibodeau Elementary School in Southern Louisiana. And what is important in this photo, which is, I'm not in this photo, this is a newer photo. What's important is to realize the demographic. The majority of the people in this photo are Black students. And that is important to understand going further into my story. Ironically, my best friend during this time was a white child. That is also important going on. This is where I started to build my identity outside of race, who I am in regards to my intelligence, my personality, et cetera, et cetera. This is where things were built. This is the golf course I played on practically every day with my friend. There's a lot of things to reminisce on, but what's important to understand is that in Louisiana, coming from Louisiana to Bainbridge, it was an extreme culture shock, very, very extreme. So I went from a predominantly Black and Latino school in a lesser fortunate part of the Deep South to this. It looks like a college campus. It's Wilkes Elementary School, a very, very predominantly white school, and it was a struggle to begin with. I would go through the halls, and all that I would be reminded of is that I'm the only one here. I am the only one here. I am the only one here. I was reminded that I am Black everywhere I went, which is something I hadn't experienced in Louisiana. It was normal for me. I spoke very differently back in Louisiana, and moving into Wilkes Elementary School, it was scary, genuinely. I didn't know how to get along with the other kids. I was told that I was too loud, I was too lazy, which are things I wasn't told in Louisiana. In Louisiana, I was one of the smartest kids in my class at the time. I was the only one who would do my work. I was quiet, et cetera, et cetera. And I was treated differently than the other kids. To put it as best I can, I was treated differently. It was a challenge for all of my family. I know my brother struggled. I know my sister struggles. I know my parents have struggled with it as well. Because we all have our identities residing in very different places. We don't feel, I personally, at the very least, do not feel like this is a home for me. Like Bainbridge Island is not my home. In fourth grade, I would go, people would talk about how I am the whitest Black child that they have ever met. And I remember this specifically because I spoke with an intelligent vocabulary. And I understand that is a diss towards my race as a whole, as if people who look like me cannot be intelligent. And it was frustrating. And it took a very long time for me to realize how to combat that, how to help people realize that just because I speak differently, that does not mean I am different from my Black brothers and sisters. And once I moved into Sakai, I started to notice the other Black voices around me, and how I form my identity around them. I was having serious identity struggles at the time. I didn't know who I belong with. I didn't know where to go. The other Black kids were feeling the same thing. They didn't know how to navigate. And so we weren't really friends with each other. I wasn't friends with any other Black students until maybe 8th grade. It was genuinely, it was extremely hard. I made my first really good friends here. My group is very diverse, and we converse about things that have to do with our race on a daily basis, and how we struggle with it. And that's going to be the common theme here is my race. It has been so important for me to try and understand how to deal with my Blackness in a place that is so white, that is so condescending with the message that people try to put out of inclusiveness. It is instead of pushing a message of diversity that they want to, they push inclusiveness, and there's a reason why that is wrong. I don't want to be included as a white person. I want to be included as Isaiah Brown. I'm Black. I have long dreads. I am from Louisiana, and I'm tall, etc., etc. It's scary. It's gross. They grossly objectify what our Blackness is like. It is. They expect me to be a thug, which is the predominant term, a thug. I've been called that multiple times. I have been followed through Safeway ever since I was young. And these kinds of things help me realize that whether I am in Louisiana in the Deep South, which is a genuine hostile environment for people of color, or in Bainbridge Island, a predominantly white, rich, old area, I will still face extreme hostility, whether it be in the form of microaggressions or people genuinely just calling me the N-word. And in Sakai, I started to realize my identity. It started to form. I wasn't really able to associate with my Blackness at the time because it was being lost. I couldn't figure out who I was, where I wanted to be. I couldn't figure out where my home was. I associated with Louisiana, but I was trying to transition into living on Bainbridge Island. And that's where we lead towards the 2016 presidential election. At the time, I was 12 years old. I was learning about how I already understood racism to a great degree. I understood what I was going into with the planet, and how I was going to be treated in the United States. But I didn't understand the extent of how the 2016 election could affect me. I saw Hillary Clinton and I heard horrible things about her, and I saw Donald Trump and I had heard horrible things about him. And whenever Trump won, I didn't really understand how to feel. I didn't feel one way or another about it. I was very naive at the time. I didn't really know, I wasn't really thrusted into equity at the time. I didn't understand the gravity of the situation and how much it would affect me deeply going into even the next year afterwards. I woke up the next morning and I had heard that Trump won, and I had heard that my sister had cried at school, which surprised me because she didn't understand it either. We both had no clue what was going on, and we have family who are on the opposite side who were of course joyful that Donald Trump had won, and we didn't understand why, because all we had been told at the time is Donald Trump is a racist, he is a sexist, he is a pedophile, he is all these horrendous things that you would imagine would not be fit for leading an entire country, and especially not fit for being a role model for a young Black child from the Deep South. And so that brought me into Woodward Middle School. That happened as soon as I was going into Woodward. And this is where I was met with a lot of new children, a lot of new experiences, and more importantly, a lot of new hardships. I started talking to more people, and what I started to learn was that people genuinely did not understand my struggles. They may have cared in some small way, but it didn't really matter to them. To them, I was the Black kid, um, and nothing more really. I had faced a lot of discrimination for it, to put it lightly. I wasn't really, people wouldn't really talk to me. They wouldn't let me be around them, which is something that you hear about in movies. Really, it was hard to find a place in my heart to forgive these people for how they treated me at the time. Whenever people would try to talk to me, I would be spiteful, I would be angry, which wasn't the way I was meant to handle things. And I would learn this. I would go into class and we would talk about things like racism. We would talk about the Central Park Five and social studies, or during MLK days, everyone would start randomly coming up to me and asking me questions about everything that they could think of, like what is gang violence like, which of course I have no part of. They would just assume that since you're Black and you're not from here, you understand what gang violence is like, or where are you really from? That was one of the most common things I heard. Where are you really from? And I've never been outside of the United States in my entire life. The closest I've been outside of the States is Puerto Rico, which is a territory. And so my only answer is I'm from Louisiana. That's always been my home to me, because that's where I was able to get most of my experiences with my people, the Black people. And so whenever I get these microaggressions, these questions, I start to resent people. I started to resent people for how they acted towards me, for how they belittled me in these small ways that all just built up until I started deeply resenting the people around me. And that's why I don't talk to many people besides the close friends I've had since 5th and 6th grade. And so it's hard for me to build relationships with people that I don't really know much about. I had this perception that people did not like me, and everyone tells me otherwise, but it's hard to believe. It's part of that identity struggle that I've had for so long. How can I identify as Black while living as a white child? Basically, I live as a white person on Bainbridge Island, but I identify as Black. And one of my favorite quotes that I heard in the song is, Black people from the hood are the best actors. I have to act. I had to portray a different version of me to be able to get across as normal. And not until early through freshman year did I realize this is not how I want to be. I felt violated, really, from the people around me. I wasn't allowed to be Isaiah Nathaniel Brown. That wasn't an option. And the only way that I felt myself was at home or with a select few people. And even then, it was hard to let them in at the time. It felt traumatic to not be able to speak to anybody. And so I closed myself in, and I took these battles, I took these problems, and I faced them alone. And that was the biggest mistake I made going through Woodward. And this was just me in 7th and 8th grade. I had traumatic experiences during those times as well that stuck with me that I didn't speak about. I acted like it didn't bother me. And so people decided, and as people decided to talk to me more, that I was a good person, that they wanted to talk to me, that they wanted to be my friend even. I pushed them away. I pushed them away very quickly. I didn't trust anyone. I would get annoyed with people when they would come up to me and talk to me, because I was under the impression that no matter who it is, they are going to frustrate me in some way. They are going to do something that is going to be passive aggressive towards my Blackness. And that was what I was so afraid of. I was afraid of hearing my friends saying the N-word. More importantly, I was always, every day I would hear something around the school about so-and-so is saying the N-word all the time, who and who, whatever, whatever. And I was just terrified that it was going to be one of my friends, because I knew that if I caught one of my friends doing things that were racist, I would not be able to be associated with them anymore. Um, I hold grudges, and it's another problem I've had because of these experiences. Um, and I worry a lot. I haven't really seen much change, uh, and that's the scary part. Like whenever I see young Black children, like my little sister, or a kid I know named Speedwell, I feel for them. Like growing up, it's scary, especially my experience being different. That because for kids like my young friend Speedwell, he has been growing up on Bainbridge Island just about his whole life. And so it'll be harder for him to relate to these experiences with many various Black people from different backgrounds that I have. So it will be even harder for him to be able to associate with his Blackness. And the school system doesn't have any way to help students like me and him, or me and my sister. Um, and as I got into the high school, I started to solidify myself with social justice and equity, and and politics. Politics has always been a part of my life, and I talk about it all the time with my family, with my friends, and with people who don't even know me, because I love teaching people about where I, as a prominent Black man on the island, um, who is respected by his peers now, um, feels about his politics. I spend a lot of my day talking about it. I miss schoolwork because of politics, um, and it has become a much more important of my life, part of my life. And in freshman year, I really started to get into trying my hardest to uplift other Black people. I started talking to more Black people because there were more at our school. There's 1,000 kids. There's about 7 or 8 Black kids at that school now, which is a big number for us. And as I learned about their experiences, especially from people who were either older than me or my age and had lived on Bainbridge their whole life, I realized that as different as we were the same, and we were connected by our skin, our race. We were connected by our ancestors, by what we believed in, the music we listened to, the clothes we wore. No matter where we were from, we all acted the same in some way, and it was because of our Blackness. It was very empowering to be able to confide in these kinds of people, um, and we started to band together. We started hanging out with each other. We started and we started getting a reputation for it around the school. If you have questions, go ask so and so. Go ask Isaiah. He'll probably be happy to answer it. And so I've changed. I've learned that the only way that I can fix these problems at where they nip them in the bud, is to let them ask those hard questions that they don't understand. I will let them ask these questions that I may think are stupid, but they don't understand either. And that has really helped me realize my Blackness as a whole, because as people ask me, I start to think more about it. I start to realize more. And it's been therapeutic, honestly, to teach others. And that's why I love to do it so much. That's why I'm here today. It helps me get out what I'm thinking, without being too personal, and it's great. And it helped me so much through freshman year, because that year was very hard for me, especially nearing the end. But being able to help others and teach others and uplift others with their struggles with social justice in whatever way, shape, or form, um, it was empowering, honestly. And then moving on into the 2020 election, in the run up towards it, I was learning at a very fast pace about the political ideologies that would clash, like fascism and socialism and communism and et cetera, and what I should be afraid of. And fascism, which was the biggest, scariest thing that we should all be concerned about. And I would teach others. I would teach others as much as they can to try and sway their mind towards good. And it's a challenge. You can't come at them angry, and I'm a very impatient person, so it's a very challenging thing to do for me. So it was a learning experience. The 2020 election was. I I don't feel good about it regardless. It was I don't believe Joe Biden or Kamala Harris are fit to run this country at all, but I will teach others as to why they are a better option than, of course, the former Donald Trump as our president. Um, it was this was also during the George Floyd riots and protests, which I would all consider protests. I don't believe riots are a great term. I believe that, like as Martin Luther King said, riots are the voices for the silent. If say we have business owners everywhere who will only listen to what will gain them more money, the only way that we can get them to listen is by destroying their capital. And if that's what it comes to uplift the lower class and Black people and brown people, that's what we have to do. And that's what happened. There are other ways, but whenever you've been trying to speak for so long, such as these young Black children have, and whenever that frustration is finally taken out, and then violence is coming back towards them, even when they're being peaceful, it's a challenge. Whenever I first heard about George Floyd's death, I wasn't surprised at all. I was surprised that other people were surprised, because this has happened over and over and over and over again. Like people like Trayvon Martin and Khalif Browder, or Breonna Taylor, which happened afterwards. There are so many examples of what has happened to us since slavery, since the civil rights movement, that shows that a minimal amount of change has occurred. It's gross. It is genuinely disgusting that people don't understand. And that is because we have been portrayed in the media for so long as victims. We always play ourselves into victims. We can't bring ourselves up. We're all poor. We don't want to work hard enough to get out of our situations. If we would just work harder, we would be able to uplift our own communities, which is an unrealistic goal. We have a horrifically low minimum wage. We have single Black mothers who are working 2 to 3 jobs just to hold an apartment and put food on the table for their children. And I have to teach these things every single day to a different person, basically. And it's incredibly frustrating sometimes, because I don't understand why their parents cannot help them learn. I am not an encyclopedia of Black people. That's what I feel like I've been coined as for a lot of people. I'm just an information bank for how Black people feel all the time, because I am not every single Black person in this country. I couldn't tell you what it's like being someone who's Black but below the poverty line, which most of us are. And I've tried to tell parents even that they need to teach their kids. They cannot be the wrong in the world, because if they don't teach their kids, their kids are infinitely less likely to learn from their experiences. And that's what I feel like is the most important thing to know, is teach your children like my parents did for me. I am so grateful to have the parents that I did, who helped me without forcing me, who helped me understand what I was going through, my Blackness, what the elections were about, helped me understand politics. I am incredibly, incredibly grateful. I was very lucky to have parents who were willing to do that for me. I know most people don't. Especially parents who are so intelligent and so empathetic towards me as well. No matter how idiotic I've been, no matter how frustrating I've been, they have never ceased teaching me. And that's what's so important. Parents on this island especially are refusing to teach their kids. And that's how you end racism right where it is making sure that parents teach their kids. And to make sure that their parents teach their kids, that's not up to me. That's up to you, whoever the parents are in this call. You have to teach your kids. That's the best I can say. Let's say they're 14 or 15. It should have started earlier. It should start as soon as they're born. Since I have to go through that as soon as I'm born, they need to learn, so that say they're 6 years old and they see that Black child in fourth or fifth grade, they aren't treated differently. Their Blackness is celebrated just the way whiteness is in our society. And the backdrop of all this, throughout all I've been through, throughout all I've seen others go through, is that I've stuck with it. I've stayed with the game. At the end of the day, no matter how low I've gotten, I've stuck with it. That's really all you can do, is push through. Do the best that you absolutely possibly can and push through. There's nothing else there's no better way to put it. Is no matter how frustrated you may get, no matter how angry or impatient you may be, you will be respected if you push through. And that's what I've learned. That's what I've learned from all of my experiences. And it's very important that you teach that to your peers, to your children, even to your parents. Um, that's another, and that's the beautiful thing about it, is that kids have now had to teach their parents, and you have to be open. You can't keep secrets from each other anymore. This isn't the 60s. We aren't alone in our own heads. We're learning about mental health. We're learning about impoverished nations. We're learning about all these world issues, and especially since we have the internet, you can't lie to your children. It's impossible to lie to your children about issues now because they'll just go on their phone. So you have to be open. If you're open with each other, you can be open with many more people, and you will cause that domino effect, that change that me and other people of color want to see so desperately. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you so much for coming, for listening to me, and I really hope you'd like to come back.
Thank you so much, Isaiah. Thank you, Sarah, as well. I'm going to go ahead and go straight to the Q&A because we have a couple of questions, and I have some burning questions as well. That was just fantastic. I really appreciate everything you put into that, Isaiah. Truly, I'm honored to be here to hear your story. Let's go to a first question, which is, do you ever resent your families for putting you in the position of being the only one? And if so, how do you grapple with those feelings? Only one meaning a person of color, person from another country, someone who's perceived as being a foreigner, I would say. Either one of you just jump right in.
Me personally, absolutely not. It wasn't really their choice. They wanted us to be raised in an area where we could get the best education and get the best handle on our minds. And I'm actually incredibly grateful for it. Um, and the best part about it is that they taught me how to deal with it. They stuck with me the whole time and made sure that I understood what I was going through. And how do I grapple with the feelings, even though I don't resent them for it? And what I find to be best is to just speak with people about it. I love using my voice to talk about things. I talk too much, as I should say. I talk way too much. But as long as I'm being listened to, that's how I grapple with it. As long as I understand that people are listening to me, that's what's most important to me.
Thank you, Isaiah. Sarah, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I can definitely agree with Isaiah. I don't feel like I resent my parents necessarily, because at the end of the day, everything they've done is just to give me the most opportunities in life. But I am grateful of the fact that my parents, had me live in an outside the country for a portion of my life. I feel like my experiences might have been different if I were born and raised on Bainbridge, but the fact that my parents made it a point to send me to Ethiopia in the summer, to send me to see my family in the United Arab Emirates, to send me to the US, and to make sure that I was getting kind of equal exposure of every part of my identity. I'm very grateful for that, because not everyone has that experience.
Thank you, Sarah. We have another question from Miss Chastity Malatesta, one of the best humans on earth, in my opinion. Just going to say that right now. We can all agree she's amazing. Chastity's question is, what words of wisdom would you give to middle and high school kids to help them navigate white-centered spaces on the island?
Just be you. That's the best thing that I can say, is don't be afraid to be who you are. You don't want to put up a front. As soon as you put up that wall, it's going to be incredibly hard to tear it down. And that's what I found. Just don't put up a front. Be yourself. Yeah, I know it's corny, but it's true. Is be yourself.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind when you read that was don't settle. And honestly, it can be really difficult to understand who you are and how you fit into these spaces. But you know, I've seen so many. I even had a conversation with a friend saying, I don't know if I should go to a predominantly white institution or go to a historically Black college. And I had another friend who said, the whole of America is a predominantly white institution. So ultimately, you're gonna end up there. And I thought that was interesting, and I just feel like you shouldn't settle. I feel like you should always know who you are, and my parents call it your true north. And if you ever feel like people are wanting you to change, just always remember what your true north is.
Thank you. Another question is, did you see Black excellence being taught in your history classes?
I'm pretty sure Black excellence would be the last thing that would be taught in one of my history classes. The last time that I remember being taught about Black experiences at all in class was during math class when we had a video we had to watch for MLK Day, and that was the closest that I think we ever got.
That's fair. What are your thoughts, Sarah?
Yeah, honestly, like I said, I feel like there has been a shift. I mean, my first year on Bainbridge was very difficult for me. I didn't know, if I fit into this community, honestly speaking. And it's just because I felt like people really didn't want to, people didn't want to make things messy by speaking about people of other races when in reality it's, the complete opposite. And at first I felt like people were too, they didn't want to talk about it. But I feel like after the past year, there's been a really big shift where students aren't only interested in learning, but are actively trying to learn or educate themselves on their own time. And I feel like that's the first step in the right direction.
You mentioned kids teaching their parents and kind of a role reversal when it comes to having conversations about race and social justice in the home. What do you think your parents have learned from you?
Um, I think what my parents may have learned from me is to is most importantly just to listen to other people. They're already great listeners, but of course we've all had our problems, but is to listen to younger people. And now I know very clearly, they've told me very many times that we have to let the young people speak. That's what I feel they've learned. I think that's the best advice anyone can give is to let the young people speak at the moment.
I think for my parents, I feel like this is a generational thing. I feel like when my parents came to the US, it was not as, like things racially weren't just as good as they are now. And they, as first generation immigrants, didn't feel like they could speak out about certain issues. And I think that with every generation, a stronger standard of social justice is being made. And so my parents were, the ones who kind of planted the, seed and got me initially interested. But I feel like continuously I'm even breaking the boundaries that their generation thought that they could achieve in terms of social justice by talking about things that might have seemed radical when they first came to the US.
Awesome. What advice would you give white people who want to learn but who don't want to sound condescending?
Um, I'd say just ask, really. There's not really any better way to tiptoe around it. You just have to ask these questions. Um, the best way to not sound condescending is if you feel you have could come across as condescending, just ask. Was that condescending? Was that offensive? And if so, that's not how I meant to put it. I'm just genuinely curious. I know I would take that well. I would be delighted to hear something like that from someone, honestly. Um, uh, that's really the best advice I can give. Just ask and be empathetic, more importantly. So if they are offended, don't be angry at them. Don't be annoyed. Um, just brush it off for a little while. And maybe if you have that question, you can approach someone else about it.
Thank you.
I think first of all, the fact that you're even asking that question just shows that you're a sincere person, and that's always going to be the first step. But, there are so many issues that we could choose to focus on, and there is so much that we do not know ourselves. So I think the first step is really just admitting that you have to learn, and you will always have to learn. Even I will always have to continue learning. And once you can come to terms with that you are just continuously learning, that's when, I don't think that you will come across as condescending at all.
We have another question. This is from Ms. Karen Vargas. From your perspective, what do you think are the pressures now on Black students to assimilate on the island?
I believe that the pressure is incredibly high. From my own experiences, I felt unbelievably pressured to assimilate. I feel like that if I didn't assimilate into this white culture, I wouldn't belong at all. And it was very hard for me to get out of that mindset. I'm happy I did, but I'd say that the pressure is immensely high, and I believe that the school system just kind of reinforces it, to be honest.
Yeah, in terms of assimilation, I just feel like if we really on Bainbridge want to embrace diversity, that means coming to terms with the fact that we are all different, and that is okay. I feel like when I first came, there was this idea that being different was being weird, or the fact that I grew up overseas, there would be times where I spelled words differently. Like I would spell realize with an S because I went to a British school, and people were like, and instead of thinking that that's different and bad, different is okay and different is good and different can be celebrated. So I just think that we as a community need to be more welcoming and more accepting, and that truly means accepting that people are very different from each other, and that's okay.
Okay, just one or two more questions here. You mentioned social justice being intrinsically linked to your identity. You both have felt this strongly, that you have a calling to do this kind of work. How has social justice informed not just who you are, but who you want to become?
For me, whenever I was younger, I wanted to like create things, say be an engineer. But as I've grown up, as I've gone into social justice, I realized that my genuine calling is doing whatever I can for civil rights. And if I can make a living off of it, even better. But I also do not want to make a living off of other people's struggles. Um, I'd say that being able to be like someone like a civil rights lawyer or something along those lines is what I really want to do. It seems like it would make me happy.
For me, like I mentioned, just organizing or donating never felt like a good enough answer. I always just wanted to understand why this was an issue to begin with. So for me, history was always my favorite subject. The reason I actually took Running Start was to take public economics classes and that kind of thing as well, just so I could further my own knowledge and understanding of equity issues. And I don't know what this means for my future, but I do know that I really, really want to learn about it. And it is my greatest passion currently. And I'm very lucky to say that next year I'll be attending Stanford University, where I will be continuing to study economics and political science. So I don't know exactly where this will go, but I just do know that this is a cause that, I can't escape, honestly. It's something that I just want to learn more about.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to meet you both, to hear both of your stories. And just me personally, selfishly, I really hope that we can welcome you to BEMA again in the future, in a future collaboration, maybe of your own of your own like creation. So please do keep in touch. And do either of you have any last thoughts, anything we missed or that you'd like to leave us with?
I guess the last thing I would say is I know things are incredibly rough right now, especially if you want to learn without even being able to go outside of your house. It's just as I said, just stick through. There's not much you can do. There's light at the end of the tunnel. Just keep going. Just keep chugging on.
Yeah, I think that if you want to be interested in social justice or equity work, I definitely think be in it for the long haul. It can be very frustrating, so pace yourself. Just keep reading, keep learning. The fact that you came to an event like this just tells me that you are one of those people who want to keep learning. So just like we all are, just keep learning, stay hopeful, because, it'll take a long time, but things are going to head in the right direction.
Well, with you two doing all you're doing, I know we're headed in the right direction, and I just appreciate you both. And I know that everyone here has got lots of food for thought for tonight. So thank you again so much, Sara and Izaya. Please keep in touch, and I look forward to hearing from you both soon. Thanks everyone for being here. That's it for us.